Tonight, you know him from the talk and Instagram. He is Pragmatic Ideals. He's been on the ground in Seattle and Portland, and tonight we'll get a first-hand perspective on what's really going on. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will lead the DNC against the Donald in November. Will they be enough to unseat the Trumpster? Will America again be forced to pick between the lesser of two evils? Will this be the year the Libertarians make the entrance to break the two-party system? The NFL is playing, and so are we. The 2020 OTA Fantasy Football League is accepting applications. Email me at mikeallensports@gmail.com to enter. There's no fee to enter, and the winner of the Super Bowl gets a free barbecue dinner on two from me. The Sky Marshal Leland Freeman is here, along with Mad Mike, and the player to be named later. I'm Mike Allen. This is the Radio Man Cave, and you are now on the air.
And so they're critiqued on those grounds when really it's a collective movement. Very similar to WTO, actually, but we didn't make those same critiques against WTO.
Now, do you think the protests that are going on right now, do you think they're having an impact at all?
Absolutely.
And what kind of changes have you seen?
Well, we have the ending of qualified immunity in Colorado. We have a reduction in the budget in Austin. We have defunding going around many places. You have the arrests of the officers surrounding George Floyd that I feel the pressure nationally made an influence. You also have more conversations going on about the role of police in our society. And those conversations were sort of left to the fringes for a while, but now it's mainstream.
And you think that defunding of the police is a good thing? The budget cut in Austin, that was a good thing?
Absolutely.
Do you know that homicides are doubled in Austin and crime is up almost 60% since the beginning of the year?
It's not surprising. Economically speaking, that would go. But do you know that since 1996, violent crime has gone down almost 50%?
Yeah. Well, the people in Austin probably aren't agreeing with you right now, and it looks like the mayor and city council are on their way out in a big way. But do you think defunding the police is going to solve the systemic problem that starts before the police officers even get involved?
Honestly, that's a tough question, namely because there's not going to be any one solution that solves any problem. I think defunding the police is a good first step. When you think about the lack of tax revenue that most cities are going to be experiencing because of the coronavirus shutdown, and also take into effect that we are first deciding to defund welfare, healthcare, and education when funding those specifically reduces crime. Defunding the police makes logical sense because we need to defund the police before defunding the things that actually reduce crime.
Okay, now in Seattle, were you part of the Chaz? Were you part of that, or did you go visit that? Give me your impression on what was going on there.
So saying that you're a part of an organic expression of public outrage is easy. You just show up. But the implication of what you're saying is more like I was part of like a planning or an organization that was in that.
I asked the question wrong. Did you get involved on a personal level with Chaz by going to support them, being a part of what they're doing?
Yes, very much so.
Okay. And what was now? Of course, we only get what we see on the TV, and I said it before, and I'll say it again. I believe half of what I see and none of what I read. So when we're talking about the atmosphere inside of Chaz, give us a feeling about what you saw inside that area.
It's impossible to describe the feeling without explaining how that area appeared in the first place. A few days after George Floyd's death, there was already protests on the street, and most of it was very jovial and just like, hey, we want change, we're going to march. SPD is pretty notorious for coming down very hard on unsanctioned protests, and they hit us with tear gas, rubber bullets, arrested people. So the next day it was bigger, they came back harder, it became bigger, and then it became the line right there at the precinct. Now, after multiple days of tear gas, what initially happened was a bunch of wealthy taxpayers ended up getting tear gassed in Capitol Hill. And so the city council tried to mitigate that and allowed basically an open area for the protests to sort of live. Organizations started opening up, and it was beautiful. There was multiple different groups. There was even some libertarians there. And it was new, it was fresh, it was it was dirty because nobody really knew what we were doing yet.
So there's no public services. They stopped picking up the trash. They stopped. The city services for that kind of stuff ceased in that area, correct?
There was no disruption of city services per se, except for trash. Trash was blocked. However, most of the protesters would go around and collect their own trash and place it outside of the zone for it to be picked up. The city actually supported CHOP by putting in more services, i.e., porta potties and the like.
Okay, around the perimeter.
In the park, actually.
In the park is okay.
Within, yeah.
Now there were stories that shop owners and small businesses that were inside the zone were approached by the security forces, who were armed, asking for free stuff, money in some cases, or else they wouldn't provide security for those businesses. Is there any truth to that?
No. Absolutely none. There were some rumors that were started from that, and specifically talking about the security forces, there were multiple groups who would be considered security that were involved. Some of them were actually private security hired by the shop owners in the area. Most of the business owners in the area actually loved CHOP being there because it increased foot traffic that hadn't been there since COVID. There was a lot of people buying food to come visit the mural and the other artwork. So a majority of them supported it, even though some did put in a lawsuit against the city because of it.
And what was the lawsuit alleging?
The lawsuit was alleging the city did not fulfill its duties to protect the area, basically.
Well, if everything was copacetic, what were they afraid of to where they needed protection?
Most of the claims are going through the insurance companies for loss of business or business interruption claims. In order to put in a business interruption claim through insurance, you actually have, it's better to have an actual civil suit against the city.
So it wasn't because of anything. They just were taking advantage of the legal system to sue.
I would say, except for the auto parts store, which there was an argument between a group that I'm actually not completely familiar with. There was an argument with one of their employees and somebody organizing within CHOP, and then there was an attempted arson, or a supposed attempted arson, and a back and forth that ended in some property damage.
Now, is that the auto zone where the guy that was supposedly a police officer was there instigating?
Yes.
Breaking the windows? Okay. Now, you said the first night that you guys were out there, you were tear gassed and pepper sprayed. Was that you were peacefully assembling and the police just moved in and started swinging? Or was there a point where the instigators that seemed to show up at all these antagonized the police to where they had to clear out the area?
There were contentious lines. What generally happens with SPD is they do a sort of a kettling attempt. You know, they cover three sides of the protest and say, we're going to push you this way. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes the protesters, well, they don't want to go that way. And so when those two lines meet, you just wait till somebody loses their temper, or, you know, somebody reacts to getting pushed in the back by a SPD bike, and that reaction instantly equals a response. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. There's probably blame on both sides.
Now, did you see any of the, when we talk about the protesters and then the rioters, did you see a distinct difference, or did the protesters turn into rioters because of the actions between the police and the protesters?
There is actually a bit of both. There are people who came from outside of the city, specifically to be the vanguard, as they like to call themselves, of direct action. And they will come in and kind of egg people along. The first major night of protests, there was the fire bombing of the police vehicles. And that happened after a very intense response by SPD, and it was supposedly in response to that prior day's violence by the police officers. However, I couldn't tell you if it was truly a response to that or they were just looking for an opportunity. Then the looters, they came in from all around the city to take advantage of the situation after the fires started.
So they were just opportunists, basically. Because that's what we had. That's what we had here in Austin. We had a lot of the antagonists, I believe, were not from Austin, and came in specifically to, I don't know, find safety in the crowd, and be able to do that kind of stuff. You know, I drive rideshare, and I was driving through that whole thing. Got my nose cleaned out by some pepper spray from taking those guys back to their hotel, but I ended up shuttling some Antifa guys who were going to, I think they were going to attack a Walmart. Now, I don't know what kind of damage you can do to a Walmart. I might clean it up a little bit, maybe. But this was, you know, it lost steam quickly because the citizens of Austin were like, come on, guys. No, this is our deal. And they didn't mix well with the out-of-towners. Does that make sense? So I went and picked those guys up. They were the only two that showed up. But it shut down every single Walmart and Target in Austin. They were boarded up.
That in itself is a common tactic of direct action, because I want to separate this idea of just looters and then like antagonizers and then people who want direct action, because there are legitimate claims. I don't necessarily ascribe to them, but I understand them, where you have a specific target. I don't know if Walmart was denying protesters milk, like which happened to the Walgreens in Minneapolis or otherwise. I don't know if there was a specific reason for that. I'm not familiar with the protests in Austin too much, other than what was at the state capitol. And those kind of actions generally have somebody who makes a statement like, we are specifically going to spray paint this, or we're specifically going to break their windows because of something, and they will release a statement and say why. The rampant violence that happens outside of that, which is usually people just taking advantage, that usually doesn't come with a statement, and there's usually no rhyme or reason to it, and it's kind of just part of what happens in a big protest like this.
I had another question. It was right at the tip of my tongue. Then I got distracted. So
That'll happen.
It does happen. A lot of moving parts. Now, what do you see as an outcome that will, what do you see coming from this? I mean, what is the perfect world that we should work towards? We may never achieve it, but what can you see as far as, you know, you want to defund and reduce police presence, reduce police forces? Where would you like to see that money, and what would be your vision of the correction to be made?
That you have 2 hours? I mean, that's a big ask for me to respond to, especially on national policy wise. Let's just take a bite.
Let's just
talked about you're against the.
Well, let's just take a bite. How would you like to see Seattle evolve? Because that's where you live.
So Seattle, I would personally like to see some of what's being called for by King County Equity Now, which is a Black-led coalition of our historic Black district, the Central District. They've put out a few points which are very straightforward and make sense. Interestingly enough, while they do towards Black-owned businesses and sort of people of color in general, a majority of the money they're asking for is for the poor area in general. They're specifically demanding that some money from our budget shortfall be taken from SPD and put into things like Seattle Public Schools, low-income housing, etc. And I think that's perfect. That's exactly what should happen. The idea of funding a police force to continue to arrest people when we have bigger issues it's silly. We're kind of trying the same thing over and over again and not learning our lesson.
So if somebody in Seattle, a citizen of Seattle, violates state law or takes the rights away from somebody else and violates state law, which is agreed upon by elected officials that we elect, what should be the process to bring that person to justice if there's no police force and this money is sent other places or funding other things?
So you can't separate talks about defunding the statistics of arrests. I mean, you were formerly a police officer. What statistically are the nonviolent drug arrests? What's the chunk of arrests that is?
Well, mostly what I dealt with on my side of town were the dealers. We didn't really go after the users because crack was the big thing. And once somebody gets hooked on crack, taking them to jail every night's a waste of time. We got them blankets, maybe a cup of coffee. If they needed medical treatment, we called EMS or took them down to the hospital ourselves. But once you're actually using, then that's, it's redundant and silly to continue to take people to jail that are just going to end up right back in jail because of their lifestyle choice. Does that make sense?
But there you go. When you think about
so most of our nonviolent drug offenses were the dealers. And dealing drugs, I mean, you could call it, I mean, there's so many ways you can play with words, but I don't believe that we spent a lot of time in Austin anyway on marijuana users, crack users unless they needed medical treatment. Heroin was another big thing down south with my people, our people, right? But it was mostly the dealers we went after, and then the network that we went after. But I agree with you. I think more money should be put in towards getting these people help. However, that wasn't my question. My question was, if somebody breaks a written law and takes the rights or property away from someone else, if you defund or de-escalate the police presence, how would you go about bringing that person to justice?
Probably the same way we go now, since only 25% of arrests actually equal in solving a crime. It really wouldn't make too much of a difference. There are still, defunding the police doesn't mean getting rid of all police. The police would still be there. We're just going to take them off of things like we're going to stop raiding homeless encampments. We're going to stop arresting people even for dealing drugs because...
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up. Right now in Austin, we have a huge, huge problem with homeless because the mayor ordered the police department to stop any and all camping enforcement and everything else. So they've pretty much taken over. That's where the crime is coming from, by the way. The petty crime, the burglaries, the car burglaries, because these guys, they're all over the place. And of course, they have to feed whatever habits that they have. The police presence is gone, and they've overrun the city. So how do you enforce? How does the city enforce the homeless population and keep people from getting comfortable being homeless, for one thing? But how do we curb that?
Through intervention, because you say the police left, but I'm assuming that the amount of money that was spent on keeping the police there didn't move to actually figuring out how to get them out of there. I'm assuming that
the budget was cut by a third.
But that just happened 2 weeks ago.
And Austin Police Department, the other thing that happened beyond that, they pushed back at a cadet class and finally canceled it. and we haven't had a new cadet class in over a year and a half. We're 200 officers short with 200 more officers retiring this year, so we'll be 400 officers short by the end of the year, going into 2021 with no new cadets hitting the pipeline. Is that kind of the goal that we're reaching? Less police presence. Less police presence means less arrests, means less people getting shot or beat.
I would talk about the same goal that would be backing up on the broken windows policing, like what happened in New York. Just by pulling back on the broken windows policing, criminal complaints they dropped. Crime went down. Just I don't know about Austin. Like, I don't know what areas. I'm not super familiar. I've only been once. So I couldn't tell you exactly where those police are, where they're getting pulled from. But I know at least in other major cities, by backing away from the over-policing, it is pretty obvious that the crime doesn't skyrocket and actually things do better. And you can start spending money on things that actually reduce the petty crime caused by homelessness, because you're actually giving them drug treatment centers and you're giving them low-income housing, and you can spend money on other projects that offer jobs, etc. Those things actually reduce crime, not police.
So you believe the police department, peace officers create crime? They cause crime.
Systematically, yes, absolutely.
And how is that done? How is that done? When the police department is reactive, how is that done?
So you're making me focus on just the police officers when that's kind of impossible. Like, this is a system. You cannot separate it from the court system that goes behind the police officers. You cannot separate it from when somebody has an arrest record, they're not likely to get a job. When you can't get a job, you're going to try to get money some way. What are you going to do? You're going to turn to crime. Now, that
goes back to personal choice.
This goes back to the poverty trap. This goes back to thinking, because you can't use the individual as a scapegoat when you're talking about entire systems that influence statistical reality of populations.
But doesn't a system need participants?
Obviously, but...
And is that system filled with volunteers?
Again, this goes back to, statistically speaking, it is impossible to determine what an individual is going to do, but it's very easy to predict what people are going to do. I'm not saying everything is deterministic. I'm not saying that the system demands that people turn to crime. I am saying that, statistically speaking, having a criminal justice system which focuses on these poor areas and keeps them in this cycle of poverty will create more crime over time.
And you believe by removing police officers, thus more people will get away with it the first time and not get caught, thus be put into the system?
I believe by moving where we're spending money. I'm not even saying necessarily to get rid of all police officers.
Or just cut back on them.
We can cut back on them. We should drop arrest quotas. We shouldn't be spending so much money for their military equipment.
Well, I can tell you from experience, there are no quotas. As a matter of fact, per our conversation prior, and I'll say it again for the audience, my perfect night as a police officer is when I showed up, drove around for 10 hours and burned gas, went to 0 calls, had 0 reports, ate on time, and went home. Other than that, I was a slave to that computer, and that computer pop up calls, and I'd go answer the calls, and that would solve the problem. So right now, with less police, if I get called, if the police are called for service for a family violence call or a drug deal that somebody sees and wants to call because it's in their neighborhood, they don't want it in their neighborhood. Less police means a longer wait time, longer response time. Right now in Austin, I think it went from 5.5 minutes, which was one of the top in the nation. We were pretty proud of that. Now it's over 15 minutes for an officer to respond. And it can't be everywhere at once. So the thought process you have is if there's less cops, there's less arrests because less people are committing crimes. When it's people are still going to commit the crimes. There's just not going to be anybody there to be able to take them to jail or enforce the law.
Talk about jail. Of the 10 million arrests that happen each year, 86% of them, 80 to 86% of them are nonviolent drug offenses, which gives them a record.
Okay, we're talking about two different things here.
No, we're not.
Yes.
That's
Hold
the
on.
thing.
Hold
you
on.
want to separate these things, but you cannot separate these things.
If you want to talk about ending the drug war, I'm with you. If you want to talk about nonviolent drug crimes and personal use, going to jail for personal use and getting 10 years for a brownie, I'm with you on that. I'm with you. But to say that somebody is going to get into a system because police officers arrest him and the cause of him getting in the system is that he got arrested is basically saying the only reason why this guy made a personal choice to get into a system which is a voluntary, which you are part of voluntarily, is you got caught. So the less police means less people are going to get caught. Calls for service are still going to be there. There's just not going to be the police officers there to go answer the calls, right?
That is undoubtedly a straw man of my argument, because what I'm talking about is like you're saying, like one has to happen before the other, and what I'm telling you is that if you take the money that is normally spent on over policing, and you admitted that the drug war was a mistake. There's at this point, since the drug war, there's billions of dollars spent on enforcing the drug war.
Well, I can safely say the drugs won.
Well, yes, especially here in Seattle. There's a very interesting thing that we've legalized, and one of our most popular shops is now on a corner that historically arrested hundreds and hundreds of minority drug dealers, and now none of them, even though they're a part of like the historical business that was selling marijuana, they cannot get into the legal business. They cannot actually become a legal business because of their arrest record. So there's a bunch of white people making tons of money off of recreational marijuana, while all these people who started it, who are from here, from families going back to the 1800s, they can't access it. Why? And so changing where that money goes, I'm saying, can reduce crime in the long time. I'm not saying that just removing police, don't arrest them so crime's not going to happen. No, I'm saying if we take that money and spend it on things like education, job creation, and investing in our communities, over time, statistically, crime will go down. And that's a proven reality. If we invest in communities, crime goes down. If we invest in jobs, crime goes down. If we invest in education, crime goes down. And what this entire movement is about is defunding the police means taking these billions and billions of dollars we spend on trying to arrest the guy with the pot brownie and put it into, hey, let's get him into a trade school. Hey, let's get that drug addict some sort of rehab. That's what defunding the police is about, and that is what I'm saying, and that is how I am able to say that yes, pulling back funding on policing, not necessarily individual police officers responding, will indeed reduce crime.
But part of the defunding the police means there's less money to hire police officers, which means there's less actual officers.
Absolutely. I've been told since a young age that I should be very careful with my money. I need to know the value of a dollar. And I think our overfunded police departments need that. Now, I don't know what's happening in Austin, but I know here in Seattle, there are some beat officers making $400,000 a year. Did you make $400,000 a year when you were a police officer?
I think the best year I had was $132,000, but a lot of that was escort work and contract work.
Oh, yeah, well, these are just regular beat officers. Our administration costs for the SPD are astronomical.
Well, I would have to. I don't know of any beat officer that gets paid specifically from the city $400,000.
It's in the budget. There's a few of them that've been released.
They might make it in overtime. I'll have to look into that. That's a pretty good gig, though, man. Ride around in a car for $400,000.
Overtime is another big one. Usually every year with the May Day protests, pretty much every single SPD officer is out there full year.
My favorite overtime was Bob Marley Festival. Are you kidding me? I got paid $80 an hour for 10 hours to stand around and watch people smoke pot. There was no fights. The arguments, they couldn't even understand each other, but there was no fights, none of it. There was people that would go to Costco and buy 20 pizzas. And they would go cook the pizzas I'm serious, cook the pizzas at home, get big Yeti coolers, put the pizzas in the Yeti coolers, go down and sell it for $10 a slice. And they'd be sold out in like 3 hours.
That's a good racket. But that's what I mean. You consider yourself fiscally conservative, yes?
Yeah. Oh, no, I took the money. I ain't going to lie. But that wasn't from the city. I think that the most I made from the city is like $42 an hour. But I was a night shift officer, and then I had a specialty as a motorcycle officer, so there's hazard pay and all that kind of stuff. But I got two co-hosts here. One's from Seattle, and the other one is as far right as you are left.
Oh.
So I'm going to turn you over to these two clowns for a minute. Okay. And for everybody watching at home, you're going to see me because, unless Alex can go over and switch the camera on Zoom.
Let's do this.
No, on Zoom. Just use Zoom.
What do you mean?
Bring it up like I showed you, the camera, and it show the 3 different cameras. On Zoom, left, all the way to the left.
Yep.
On the screen, not on the VMIC. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Right here.
No, go down.
Okay.
A little further to the camera. Click on the arrow.
Oh.
There you go. And pick another camera. The HD. Yeah, pick the one with them on it. Those two guys.
Well, these aren't labeled either. So we have this bit where Mike doesn't label anything.
Yeah, I don't label anything.
He has a hard time labeling.
I don't like labels.
So I'm like, I don't know. All of these cameras are named C615.
Yeah.
Wait, can you guys hear me now? Maybe.
All right, go ahead and change it, and I'll turn you guys over to these guys.
Yeah, see, there we go. I don't even know where the hell that came from.
Bingo. Is my mic hot? Yeah, maybe. I can't tell.
I hear you.
Okay, right on, dude. Yeah, he was saying I'm from the Seattle area. Like, that's like me saying.
Really label these.
I'm not. I grew up out in like the middle of nowhere, out in Snohomish County.
Okay.
But for the most part, I mean, would you be supportive? And this is like a widespread model that's being gone through in Snohomish County, with like the exception being like Monroe. Pretty much, most of the other towns are actually systemically getting rid of their police departments and actually signing contracts for having Snohomish County provide their law enforcement. Which what do you think about that? Because I mean, it kind of changes. You have to think for what they're paying Snohomish County. Obviously, it's not as much as paying and maintaining their own police force.
Right.
And
now, are you talking about areas that are unincorporated that are looking to disband their own?
City of Snohomish doesn't have their own police department anymore. Sultan, Washington, that's actually where I'm from. They don't have their own police department. Neither does Startup, Gold Bar, and I'm trying to think of the other little town. These are they're legitimate cities. Startup is unincorporated, but yeah, Gold Bar and Sultan and Snohomish. With Snohomish, I mean, Snohomish isn't a small town. But yeah, a lot of them are actually getting rid of their police departments and just having the sheriff's department go and actually provide services for them. So if you go out that way I don't know if you ever go out the middle of nowhere sometimes, but you'll see like on the side of a police car, it'll
I go hiking off too all the time.
Yeah. So like if you go and see like sometimes like, for example, you'll go into Snohomish and it won't say Snohomish Police Department. It'll say Snohomish County Sheriff's Office, and then it'll be like Snohomish Department because it's actually ran through the county. So my thing is, instead of the city paying for it, the county's paying it for it at this point in time, right? And on top of that, your sheriff is an elected official. So they're held more accountable than you would have your, police chief who's appointed by city council members. What are your thoughts on that? Because, I mean, if we get rid of, and I'm for this, like if we just get rid of most actual municipal police departments and replace them with a county, I think it's a viable alternative because there's more accountability.
Honestly, I think I've actually spoken with Mike about this as well. I do like the idea of more emphasis put on the county and sheriffs, namely because he's an elected official and there is more accountability. That makes sense to me. Specifically with Snohomish, I don't know about the spread of the areas well enough, and probably I should. I was actually in Snohomish recently. And I probably should be more familiar with how the police department was funded in that area. It's tough when it comes to municipalities, namely because there's a lot of ordinances and sort of expectations of like local taxpayers within a municipality that sort of expect certain kind of policing that may be for the sheriffs to respond to that, and I'm not sure how the taxes play out, but more or less, yes.
All right, because I mean, it's kind of interesting. Like it's one of those things, and it's I spent most of my time we avoided Seattle like the plague. Like my family is originally from Ballard, and it's wild to see how that whole part of town, because like it's not the same. Yeah, it's not anything. But like, if you go, like if you're ever out in the Olympic Peninsula at all, and especially if you're heading out towards like Nia Bay and you pass by all those tiny little towns like Clallam Bay, CQ, some of those, it's all county enforced. They don't have their own police departments anymore. But then you have, it's kind of different. So like, would you be opposed? Because at these points in times, and one of my friends, he's actually a deputy for Snohomish County. They're stretched pretty thin just because the way they do hiring up there and the way, how many cadet classes they can have per year. And it's the same thing with, the state patrol up there too. Like they're just always kind of in short supply because there's not very many that actually get accepted through the cadet programs. So, I mean, would you be in favor of, reducing their funding as well? Or would you just want to leave it to where, all right, they're taking county funding, it's all from the whole county, not the individual cities, and then let the cities kind of figure out their own stuff with that surplus of money that they're eventually going to have at some point in time, if they do?
Well, in those counties, if you're talking about Nia Bay, you're talking about on the peninsula, Port Townsend, even Snohomish, really, we're talking about population numbers that are a fraction. I mean, I could take 6 blocks of Ballard and probably equal the population of Snohomish. So when we're talking about different responses, like entirely, it's kind of difficult to say that they should be defunded because I don't necessarily think that they are over policing, because when you get out far enough, you don't really have to worry about the police showing up for every little noise complaint. Whereas once you get in the city, there's a lot more police response. So it's probably not necessary to defund the police outside of even Seattle municipality in general, let alone King County.
Yeah, and that was actually going to bring up, kind of a next point, because you have to, pretty much from Everett just about all the way down to Olympia might as well just be one giant city. I mean, for God's sakes, the last time I went into Woodinville, you can't even tell when you get out of Woodinville anymore, So, I mean, how would that work, especially because you have Pierce County and King County, and wouldn't it just, at that point in time, just make sense to roll all of, like, Seattle PD services and just flush them and then just roll it into the county's duties instead? Because, I mean, even in, like, cities like, I mean, Everett's pretty big. Or if you even wanted to scale it down a little bit more, like if you look at, Marysville, or if you wanted to go look out at, like, Spokane, or even Wenatchee for that fact, how it would kind of play in those sort of situations. Because obviously they're not as, large as Seattle, or, Bellevue or Bothell even for some of them. But I mean, would it be a viable option just to kind of phase out the police department on the municipal level and the city level and roll it into the county?
Still no. Well, like I said, with the different ordinances within cities, because cities, the voters still have chances to make certain ordinances. Like Mike and I were talking about homelessness, for example. Each city has the right to get their voting population to decide how they want to respond to certain issues like homelessness. And if you spread the enforcement across that, you would need a police officer to know the difference of like their specific enforcement ordinances across those municipal lines, and that doesn't really make complete sense.
Yeah.
Like, we don't need a complete solution of the police department. However, changing where the funding goes, like, could we give a little more discretion to sort of like the county municipality? Yeah, but you can't dissolve it completely.
Yeah, I gotcha. And like, you brought up a good point for like, the municipalities have their own individual ordinances. Like, for example, for like Snohomish is a really good example, because Snohomish isn't, it's small, but it's not that, it's big, but it's small. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I mean, if you look at it, they
Especially when you go by the Fred Meyer.
Yeah, exactly. They don't have a red apple anymore. But if you look at them, like, they actually have, like, let's say you patrol like Snohomish, that's all you know. So all their ordinances, that's pretty much where you stay as a county officer. Or if you patrol like Gold Bar and Sultan, that's the only area that you typically work. So therefore, like, when it comes to all their ordinances and laws and everything else, that's what you're trained on, because that's your specific area of expertise, but you're rolled into the organization of the county. So I think, wouldn't those sort of like policies and actions be implemented in a county level to like even the larger municipalities? I would it be a viable option? Because I think that would kind of play into, obviously, like, hey, defund the police, and then also bring accountability and have the city be able to, like, hey, now we can help pay for stuff, as in like education, my favorite, libraries, and like other stuff, parks. Well, you don't really need them. But,
yeah.
I mean,
it should be noted that I'm a leftist, not a liberal, and I get uneasy when I think about abdicating municipal power to higher and higher power, because then, okay, why don't we roll all state police under the state patrol, and then why don't we run all of that under the post office and make it a federal police force? Like, I don't like that trend. I like the idea of more accountability, but I don't necessarily like completely abdicating municipal control over their ideals of policing, because it's the voters within, at least in Seattle, it's the voters within Seattle that want to defund the Seattle police, and that is part of a bigger trend line nationally to sort of lead people that way. But we are really focused on what's happening here within Seattle. Like, we are really thinking about the Central District. We are really thinking about specific districts within Seattle, and it's a local movement that just happens to be a part of a national trend. And I don't like abdicating all control of police beyond just my little city, which ain't so little anymore.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, it's kind of like how it is here too. We're not little anymore.
I was going to ask, this is another thing, especially because I haven't lived in Washington for well over a decade now. And I saw...
It's different.
Yeah, I've made a couple of visits, and I'm like, what the hell's going on here? It's been weird, to say the least. But I was going to bring this up, and I know Seattle and even, I think, Bellevue even tried to push this too as well, where they put on, like, especially in, like, stores that sold firearms, that they were actually trying to push them out just by raising taxes on them. Like, how did that? Like I said, I just saw that it happened. I don't get involved because obviously I don't live in Washington. But how did that come to fruition? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, I caught the end of that. You said that there was some attempt to push out firearms sales.
It wasn't an attempt. It actually went through, and it actually caused several businesses that sold firearms in Seattle proper to actually just leave Seattle, because they raised a sales tax on firearms and ammunition that was like exorbitant, where nobody's going to do business.
Yes.
So like, what are your thoughts on that? And how did that even come to fruition? Because like I said, I heard it happen, and I was like, well, that sucks, because obviously if you manufacture firearms in there.
So that was wrapped up in a bunch of different. Basically, they wrapped it in with sin taxes. So they increased, like a pack of cigarettes here is almost $12 now, and there's a ton of other things. And basically, those were easy things that they could say, oh, we can tax this, we can tax this, we can tax this. And people didn't really have a problem with it, namely because we have a bunch of tech bros from California moving in. They don't really like their guns. I didn't necessarily follow that, and honestly, I wouldn't have voted for it because I am definitely pro. I'm not a liberal. I'm a lefty.
So we're having technical difficulties, so we're more of a radio program now with our pictures up, but we're still getting the audio, and this is such a good conversation. I'm going to keep going, but I know the answer to it, but I'd like to hear your reason.
I can stop my my video and see if that helps a little.
No, well, it's on our end. The thing is, your Zoom is doing fine. It's with our software. So,
okay.
Biden or Trump?
Oh, 100%. Okay, so I don't.
Okay, now this is an easy question. Why are we? What's going on?
It's not an easy question. It's not
because you know where I'm going with this, right?
Because I hate Biden. However, yes, you're Joe Jorgensen. But I hate Biden, but I do want the Democrats' pick for federal judges. I think what the Trump administration is doing by inserting an unprecedented number of conservative federal judges it's tearing for our judiciary in general. And yeah, I support not Trump.
Okay, now we have our token Republican who'd like to talk to you real quick here.
Okay, so let's go into further why you don't like conservative judges.
Wait, one thing real quick, Leland. First of all, I'm sorry about this guy. Also, George Hogan absolutely rules. Fuck yeah. All right, I'm sorry. Here he goes.
55 minutes into it. So let's go further. Why do you hate conservative judges so much?
Oh, you mean besides the fact that they use like literalism or sort of textualism in order to hide their like crony capitalist tendencies? You mean besides that, right?
Keep going.
Okay, so most conservative judges these days are basically Koch brothers light. They use textualism to hide the fact that
this will be pragmatic. Real quick, this will be the contentious part of the show.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Have fun.
We don't have video
have fun. I wish we did have video for this, but have fun.
I'm ready for this. Somebody may be recording my my live with this right now, so
that's great.
We'll
so we
see.
do have video for this. That's awesome.
Textualism, to me, I understand it. Like I even agree with some opinions, Dalia, but completely trying to eradicate any theories of a living constitution is damaging to what our court systems, and the overly conservative judges are basically a stop to a increasing democratization of our society.
You mean legislating from the bench? Because that's why I see the interpretation here. It's like if you're not interpreting what the the statutes and laws are, then why do they even exist at all? That's my view on
Well, so the thing is when you talk about legislating from the bench, who do you think does that more, textualists or those who believe in a living constitution?
I think it's the living constitution because you're changing what the actual text of the document actually is.
Yes, but the actual text of the document, how we how we read that, is pretty much impossible. Most like legislative sort of intent must be read into it. When you read a mens rea to a crime, you have to sort of guess the legislative intent from that. Now, if you go with the textualists, they're going to claim that they're not reading into it, but well, they are. And most of them are basically just defending laissez-faire capitalism, which I'm sure you're totally fine with. But
yeah, I mean, what's wrong with capitalism? And
that's it.
Capitalism?
That's it. Leland.
What?
Trump 2020 over here. We have. I'm feeding you this young gentleman, this well-spoken young man, and all you did. Trump.
I'm trying to be nice to the guy.
No.
Oh, don't be nice. Don't be nice.
Hey, hey, Prag and I are friends. He doesn't know you.
Right, so
I just wanted some good.
I'm trying to be nice to the guy. So I'm trying to work on first impression.
Oh, so
Yeah, no,
So wait, let me get this straight, Leland. The only way that you would be able to get a viable point across or counterpoint is that if you were belittling him. Is that what you're saying right now? so by
for me to prove a point, I have to get mad and grumpy.
Sounds like you guys right now.
No, I'm just asking. It's a pretty honest question. It's a pretty fair question.
We bust Leland's chops because we're all pretty much libertarians in here, and he's actually the friend of Roger Stone that got Roger Stone on my show. So, and he's the top-rate pilot. However,
all right.
Leland, you're letting me down, man.
Come on, man.
Building up to it.
Come on.
So what is wrong with
Take your gloves off. Take your gloves off. Pragmatic Ideals is staying up early in the afternoon because of the time zone change to talk to us. I have been waiting for this point. I have been waiting for this moment the entire week.
And you want me to make him butthurt? Is that what you're saying?
I've just interviewed him, and we found out everything we can about him.
Right, you did such a good job interviewing him, and
so now,
and then David.
You see what I have to deal with? This is what I have to deal with.
Asking all these questions.
So go ahead. There you go.
A lot of what I was going to ask, you guys already asked.
Well, that's it.
Well, no. I actually have a very good question. So when you're saying defund the police, do you think you should refund all that money to the taxpayer? Where do you think that money should go? I personally think it should go back to the taxpayer. If it's not being spent on services, then the taxpayer should be raped.
I mean, going back to the taxpayer, it's like, how should it go back to the taxpayer? Should it go back to the taxpayer through education? Should it go back to the taxpayer through creating jobs? Should we have a new deal to actually? You mean just a plain tax refund?
You're having people taxed out of their homes.
Why are we spending taxes in the first place then?
You're having people that bought homes that are now being overly appraised by greedy appraisal districts, and they're also increasing the tax rate. So you have people that bought a home maybe 20, 30 years ago.
It just took us a while to get him warmed up.
That are paying $10,000, $20,000, $100,000 plus on property taxes a year. They're going to lose their home. That's not right. That's not fair. And honestly, if we're keeping the damn schools closed, that's a huge portion of the property tax.
We were talking about the police.
Well, I want to answer this anyways because I love this because this is great.
All right, go ahead, man. Go ahead. Hey, gloves are off, buddy.
With capitalism, what you just said. What you just said is what I'm saying is wrong with capitalism. The fact that there are so many people getting priced out of their homes, like, I don't know exactly.
That's not capitalism. That's the government saying your house is worth more than it should be worth, and then we're taxing it at a higher percentage. What part of capitalism is that? It's called the government saying, pay us or you lose your damn property.
Are you saying the government controls the housing market? Are you saying that?
No. What he's I see where he's going. Hold on. He's really doing this badly. But let me step in here. It isn't the price. It isn't the price of the house that people are losing their homes. Here's a perfect example. I bought this house in 2004 for $168,000. Now I'm a veteran, and I have the homestead exemption, which I was smart enough to get, so my taxes don't go up all that much. However, if I were to sell my house today, I could only get about $270,000 for it. They appraised me at $390,000. They didn't do that, and it had nothing to do with the cost of the house, how much I would get in even trade selling it to another consumer. That has nothing to do with people getting priced out of their homes. What's pricing people out of their homes is the government, the socialist part of the government, which is take from those with the ability to those with the need, and they raise the property tax so high that people can't afford the property tax, not the actual house. So it has nothing to do with free market trade. It has everything to do with the government assessing property value in order to take as much money as they can from a property owner. That's why you see so many people losing their homes, especially in Austin. Austin has, I think they pay almost $20,000 a year for a single family home. That is twice the taxes being paid outside the city of Austin. That's why people are losing their homes.
And even then, that's still too damn high.
The house is still $140,000. Price of the house doesn't change.
Yeah, so much goes into interest and property taxes, and so little goes to principal. It's disheartening. My boss pays $900, and pays a $900 mortgage, and I'm paying $1,300 for rent. But I could not afford to get a house because I'm young and don't have good credit, and I fucked up. But it's ridiculous, like the housing cost. I mean, he bought it back like 12, 15 years ago, so that's why his is.
And the reason why you're paying as much in rent is that the landlord they need to make money on renting the property. So if they're paying $1,000 a month in property tax, and you're only paying $1,300 a month in rent, that means that they only got $300 out of that rent that can go to them, and then of course they got mortgage expenses, insurance, and everything else. So they're probably not even making any money on your place, to be honest with you, because of how high the taxes are.
I mean, other than the fact that they own the property, which in itself is an asset. But yeah,
I don't have a problem. I have a problem paying a landlord, but
yeah, I mean, I think property taxes are stupid.
They are, because you never really own your property when you're constantly paying taxes just to keep it. You're basically paying rent to the government for your own property.
Yeah, which is stupid. Taxes are dumb. I hate them.
Taxation is theft.
So the assumption that taxes are why.
Hold on, he's talking.
What's up? Oh, sorry about
Barely hear him again.
The way this is playing out is sort of an assumption, or at least implying that property taxes are why property values are going so high, which is, I mean, honestly, it's absurd. Like, yes, there could be there's a huge problem with it, and I'm actually completely against not using actual data to inform what the valuation of a house should be. I feel like we should use actual data for that and not have an ability for states to come in and sort of say, like, well, actually, we need a little bit more money, so we're going to value this up higher. No, it should go what the market rate is. However, the prices are going up mainly because of how we work in boom and bust, capitalism. There is not enough ability for us to sort of have a controlled growth of a city. Like here in Seattle, you talked about prices rising. 10 years ago, you could get an apartment here in the CD for $400-500. Now you can get a 200 square foot micro apartment for $1,600 a month, and that's not even including utilities. And that kind of movement and growth that's what's pushing people out. And then you have elderly people who moved in here, like my grandmother bought her house back in the 60s for $20,000. Now she can barely afford to live there because property taxes are going up, but Social Security is not moving with the cost of living, inflation, or otherwise.
So why is it that left-leaning city leaders are encouraging new urbanism, people moving back in? If it was affordable for people to live in the suburbs, why all of a sudden are we trying to change that and driving everyone out of their homes? And oh, by the way, if you have a higher population density, guess what? You're gonna be taxing your city services more, and so if you're having more a higher population number per officer, like what Mike was saying earlier in the broadcast, you're gonna have lowered response times. In fact, one of the main problems we had, well, not this year because of COVID, but in the past, during South by Southwest, there was an unofficial slogan throughout the city: "Don't call 911," because was it 80% of all the emergency services were downtown during the festival, something like that.
I guess.
And
I know it's a lot of overtime.
And if we go back, next year we go back, we don't have to deal with COVID anymore. We have the festivals again. But as Mike said, that we're having no recruiting classes, no cadet classes. I think was it 3 have been that were already on the books have been canceled, and 2 that were going to be taking place in the future have also been canceled.
Yeah, well, right now in Austin, Texas, what's happening is, since it's the capital of Austin, the governor has stepped in, and state troopers will be tasked to help APD patrol the outer fringes of Austin, so the suburbs of Austin, like where the highways and all that kind of stuff is. So, but hey, this has been fun. You're a good guest.
I want to come back so I can actually have some time to go after the Trump supporter.
You know what? We will set that up. We're gonna
Absolutely, and we get it on video.
I want to
backups for that.
turn his mic off.
Give me that.
We're going to have you back on, absolutely, because of our technical stuff. I put together a bunch of videos and stuff, and now we can't watch them. But anyway, we were having such a good conversation. Hopefully the people that stuck around were able to enjoy at least our conversation, and I do want to have you back. And
14 on my life.
I want to have you be the man on the ground out there. So if you produce a video or something like a report and you'd like us to use it on the show, man, just send it to me and we'll throw it on there, kind of our man on the ground. Because I like to get my sources, regardless of the ideology, someone who's actually there and living it is much more accurate than a news station that is processing it, packaging it, and then, selling it to the public. Does that make sense?
There's been a lot of bad news on both sides coming out of Seattle. Like, some people are talking about us being complete angels in the protest movement, which we aren't, and some people are talking about us burning down the whole city, and both sides are idiots.
Well, from a personal point of view, I say when the asteroid hits, I'm prepared, and I'm going to head to the hills. Asteroid 2020. Pragmatic Ideals, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for coming on. You've been a great guest. See you on TikTok.
See ya.
All right, folks, for those of you sticking around, I do apologize for the video crapping out on us. We're going to figure that out. I think it has to do with the fact that the old flamethrower might be a little bit old. So we're going to get that fixed. We're going to get back on with video next week. But for now, we're going to sign off. I'm Mike Allen. This is the Radio Man Cave, and you have been on the air.